can do the hearing from up there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We're reconvening this morning's session for the FY24 budget. We will start with Councilman Phillips to continue the first round. Chair recognizes Councilman Phillips.
Thank you, Council President Clark. I have a series of questions directed, I believe, to the Revenue Department, potentially the Treasurer's Department as well. The first question that has been of importance to a lot of residents in the city of Philadelphia is around tangled titles, and particularly how sometimes there's individuals that can have a house in grandma's name, okay, but people, for some odd reason, cannot claim any particular support to get around getting that house in their name. And then people end up falling behind in their taxes. So what are we doing today with this in this budget cycle to make sure that we are addressing the tangled title situation for a lot of folks who are experiencing tax issues in this matter?
So we have pretty liberal policy around tangled title. So if taxpayers come in and can demonstrate to us that they are in a situation of tangled title, then we will generally, I've talked about our owner-occupied payment agreement program, so I'll use that as an example. If a taxpayer comes in and they want to get into an owner-occupied payment agreement, but they are not on the deed, and they then tell us that they're in a tangled title, we'll go through a series of questions and try to ascertain the problem with tangled title, and then we will allow them to get into the payment agreement and pay, and we give them information about housing counseling agencies and places where they can go to get assistance with that tangled title.
Thank you. Next, I was wondering if you could tell me more about the residential fee that neighbors have to pay annually if they have a alarm system connected to their home. What is that? Where is the revenue going for the annual alarm system fee? I think it's around $50 or so every year. That annually, to be able to make sure that your alarm system is connected to the city of Philadelphia.
That goes into our general fund.
The general fund.
Yeah.
So, how vital is that revenue to the city of Philadelphia, and how did that come about in terms of being a fee and revenue source?
I think that actually predates me, so it's been around a while. I don't think it's not a giant fee. It's probably more about making sure people, if they have an alarm, that they're registered and that they make sure that it's not, going off when it shouldn't all the time. So I think it's probably really more about the enforcement than about the revenue.
Right. Got it. We'll talk more about that. There's some thoughts I have on that.
Okay.
Because I think it's just because is there better ways in which we can keep funding in people's pockets, even if it's just $50? That's something that for some residents that we want to encourage people to get alarm systems. For us, it may not be much. For some people that we want to encourage alarm systems, that could be something that could be a deterrent for some individuals to actually think about getting an alarm system.
Happy to discuss whether there's a better way to do that.
I just think it's important for us to reconsider those particular items. And then lastly, I was wondering if you would be able to dig deeper into how much of our property tax revenues comes from commercial property taxes.
Yep.
And of this, how many are delinquent, and how much of delinquent commercial property taxes are collectible?
Yeah, I'll do the total, and then I think Commissioner can talk about the collections. I think about 20% of our taxable assessed value is commercial.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have the breakdown with me, but we can get that to you, the breakdown between the
Yes.
delinquency, commercial and residential.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions regarding the formula that we have been using for OPA and just getting an update on. Yes, but the process that we have been using for OPA. I know there has been recommendations on improving that particular process in terms of how we go about doing assessments. Also, how we use comps as a part of the equation. I think I remember the paper did a story on me as I had to file first level of review because I think my house was like super duper assessed at a high number because houses on the same block were some new houses were assessed at a high value, but on the other side of the street it was a little different. So just give me an idea of what have we been doing to improve the formula regarding how we go about property assessments.
So, I mean, the formula itself is fairly standard that comes out of the general modeling and mass appraisal process, but each area of the city, the formula can be a little different. So, for instance, we look at a number of characteristics that could potentially influence or affect the value of a property. Most important are location, size, condition, and the use of the property. Is it a commercial? Is it a single family? That sort of thing. And those tend to be the most important factors over the overall picture. As you move to different areas of the city, some stuff like off-street parking in South Philadelphia, for instance, very valuable. Parts of the Northeast where you could park on the street if you want, not so much. So how those characteristics affect each property, it depends what part of the city you're in. So there isn't, the same influence is not the same, obviously, in every part of the city. And as far as comparable sales, we extract the information for all those characteristics from the comparable sales. It goes into the modeling process where the numbers crunch, and for each of the 13 residential zones we have in the city, coefficients are spit out that says, okay, this part, average condition is this, above average condition, is this, there's a factor, and it's a multiplicative model where a number of different factors multiplied one after the other creates the whole of the value that's produced and then reviewed by the evaluators.
And just for the record, give us an idea on the number of staff who are actually doing appraisals, the type of training that they receive to go out and do these appraisals, and then have you also done a deeper dive into the disparities of appraisals that are just basically being done in the market just in general?
So on the evaluation side, I'll give you some rough numbers. Hold on.
And do you have demographics of individuals who serve on the staff? Who's actually going out?
I have general staff demographics, yes.
Okay.
All right, so our real property evaluator positions, which are the ones doing they have certain accounts assigned to them. That is, let's just say roughly 105 staff. Not every person in that title may have accounts inventory because so for instance, we have a dedicated sales validation unit that does the sales for the whole city to potentially remove any bias of any particular area. Those are staffed by evaluators, but we'll say 105 there. And then we have additional supervisory staff of another 21 so we'll call that 120 for the appraisal staff. And then there is the modeling team, which is a 5-person unit that writes the models, builds the scripts, and takes the information that's fed to them, helps produce the values that are then reviewed by that staff that I just mentioned earlier. And so everybody that carries that title has to be certified by the state of Pennsylvania. If not, if they don't, most of them don't have it when they come in, but we do require that they get that certification within 2 years. That's a certified Pennsylvania evaluator license. And there's a series of 4 classes. They have to pass a licensing test and then continuing education every 2 years that they have to follow. That's state mandated. Philadelphia, as a first-class county, used to be the only county that was exempt from that. That changed a few years ago. It didn't hurt us because we had started implementing it on our own to get staff that training, but it is now, Philadelphia is no longer exempt from that, so we do need to have that like the rest of the state at that point. And then just general staff demographics. I can pull that up in 1 second. All right, so for full-time staff, again, this just doesn't break down specifically to the evaluators versus clerical and everything else. We are, oh, that didn't print everything on it. We'll give, to not hold the process up here, we'll, it's part of it, I don't have it here, we'll submit it if it's not there, but we're roughly, in general, 50-50 as far as white versus non-white employees throughout the different sectors of the OPA.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Thomas.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Council President. A couple areas I want to touch during this round. The first is revisiting the bird tax. And I want to ask a couple questions, so if you could try to condense your answers. I want you to talk about where we were at. Well, first, let's talk about the tax in itself. When we decide to cut a tax like the bird tax, what type of businesses benefit from that, right? Because from my understanding of what we're doing, when we cut a tax like the bird tax, I think about my brother's barbershop, or a restaurant like Relish that we acknowledged on this council floor that closed. These are businesses where all of the revenue that they generate will come from the city of Philadelphia, so they'll get taxed on 100% of their profit, compared to some of the bigger businesses who generate a lot of their revenue outside of the city. They won't get taxed on 100% of the profit. So based on what we are doing with BERT, I want you to tell me, number one, what type of businesses benefit the most, and number two, what has our growth been pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic since we made those tax cuts?
I'll Revenue Commissioner come up and help with these answers. There are, to your point, a wide variety of businesses that benefit if we reduce the BERT. It's everything from retail you talked about to professional services like accounting firms. So wide variety of businesses that Commissioner may even have kind of the list of all the different types of businesses that are subject to the BERT. And while he talks about that, I'll get you the tax numbers. They've been going up pretty healthily, the BERT revenue numbers, but I'll get you exact numbers in a second.
And I think this is important to recognize because coming out of the pandemic, what we found is that people can work from anywhere, right? The pandemic showed us that businesses can choose to be remote, they can choose to relocate. If you look at our surrounding suburbs, I would also like you to talk about how our surrounding suburbs benefit from our tax structure, like Conshohocken and places like that.
So as far as the rate reduction, if we're reducing, in this case, we're reducing the rate on the net income portion of the tax. So it gets a little complicated, but try to simplify the tax. So a business pays on their net income. It depends whether a business is a service business or whether they're kind of like a bricks and mortar retail. For a service business, it really depends on where the service is performed. So you can be a Philadelphia business that is performing services outside of Philadelphia. So then we kind of take a percentage. So let's say half of the services are performed outside of Philadelphia and half are inside Philadelphia. Then we take your net income multiplied by 50%, and that's the amount of net income you pay tax on. It's similar for businesses located outside of Philadelphia. They don't have a presence here, but they may be doing work here. I'll stick with the service industry. If they're doing 50% of their work inside of Philadelphia, then same thing. We apply 50% to their net income. They're subject to tax in Philadelphia. For sales, it's where the business is located, but there's also a component for where the sales are delivered. So again, there's a formula that tries to apportion your activity to your net income and tax you on that. So that's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how it works. It's.
So when we think about some of our bigger businesses in the city of Philadelphia, the percentage of what they pay as it relates to BERT won't be as high as my brother's barbershop. The percentage of their revenue that they generate. Are they paying the same percent of the total amount of revenue that they generate compared to that barbershop who's providing a service that's only to people in Philadelphia?
So the barbershop that's providing the service here in Philadelphia will pay on 100% of their net income because it's all here. And a large business, which presumably has business outside of Philadelphia, will only be paying on the percentage of their activity attributable to Philadelphia. So the answer is, as we joke as accountants in the answer always in taxes, is it depends. It's very case by case.
So if we wanted to give businesses a lifeline coming out of the pandemic, if we wanted to send a signal that Philadelphia is open for business, outside of the cutting the BERT tax, what would you recommend? How else can we give businesses a lifeline coming out of the pandemic? And again, thinking about the small black and brown businesses, I'm thinking about the fact that we say that less than 5% of the businesses are black-owned businesses in the city of Philadelphia. I'm thinking about the fact that a lot of businesses outside of the pandemic didn't open back up or relocated or chose to leave Philadelphia. So how do we give businesses a lifeline coming out of the pandemic if it's not through the BERT tax?
Well, I mean, that's a really complex question. So, I mean, there's been multiple tax reform commissions that have looked at ways to revise the tax structure to benefit businesses. And, you know, what seems to come out of it is, you know, broader-based rate reductions is preferred. We've used credits, which are more targeted, but in the past, so that's been one of the methods used. We found it to not be that effective, although theoretically it's really effective and it targets either a particular industry or particular sized businesses. Then you run into challenges of getting businesses to apply for it, whether or take it on their tax return, and whether the amount is worthwhile for them. So it's really challenging. I mean, I've been around taxes a long time. I've heard, so long that I can remember when the wage tax was 4.96, and as it was gradually reduced, people were saying, you know, these reductions don't really mean a lot in people's pockets. But I did a quick calculation myself today, and just for someone making $40,000 from the time when it was 4.96% till now, it would be an additional $400 a year. And so it starts to become meaningful, and I think it's the same thing for the business tax, although it might not look like it's a real lifeline now because it's not that impactful. As the finance director said, it really sends messages to businesses that Philadelphia is business friendly, and that helps to attract businesses, which is good for all businesses, right? It increases the tax base, it increases vitality. So, but again, it's a very complex issue, tax reform.
I know my time is up. If you could just answer my question about growth pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and Bob, if you could tee me up for a third round. My third round is going to be about revenue and revenue collection.
Okay, so FY19, pre-pandemic, was $541 million. In FY22, the last year for which we have actuals, it was $749 million. So substantial growth in that base.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Vaughn.
Good afternoon, gentlemen,
Good afternoon.
and Miss. My questions were from this morning. Help me to understand why it is so hard for us to spend money, going back to some of the questions that our council president had. And if we have so many people that are in need in organizations that need to pay personnel that are not receiving the money, why is that the case?
So I think there are definitely cases, and we talked about this yesterday, where spending is slower than we'd like because of some other kind of regulatory processes people have to go through. And I think there was a good discussion yesterday about how to try to work that, at least for our projects, so that they move through the system more quickly. We make sure that we can spend our money more quickly. So I think that's definitely one of the things that we're clearly talked about yesterday, and looking at and making sure we do a better job.
Can you give me an idea or a window of where you'll be able to pay these people? Because it sounds like it's families that can't be self-supporting because they're not receiving their paychecks.
So at our end, it's kind of as soon as we get the invoice, we can move it through pretty quickly from the finance end. The issue we were talking about yesterday was really kind of at the front end of getting projects up and started because of other processes they have to go through. And we clearly talked about addressing that yesterday.
So is the delay on the request side or on our side, the processing side?
I think it's sometimes it's on the request side, a lot of times it's on the process side for us. So, that's what we need to improve.
Do you have a plan to do so?
Yes. Well, that was the conversation yesterday. It's really, that process is not in finance per se, but that's part of the discussion that happened yesterday about how our agencies can coordinate and move through projects, particularly when they're city-funded projects.
Yeah, I understand we talked about it yesterday and it wasn't clear, and today isn't doing too much clarity again. Because if you don't have a plan in place or put one in place, we'll continue to do the hamster trail thing. The wheel will just keep turning and turning and turning without any solution. So I would like to know if you can, at some point, correct the insufficient answers and give us some clarity on what can be done for us to fix the problem.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gaudier.
Council President, I have some questions about the property tax appeal process. Anecdotally, we've heard from constituents that this process can be confusing. Some things that we've heard are that, one, there's unclear guidance from the city on what documentation residents can use to clearly make their case, that there is often not timely access to the materials that the city is using to make its case, that they have not been able to go to the office and get assistance, go to the revenue office to get assistance on how to file an appeal, and that with regards to the hearing, it's a lot of waiting around for long periods for a 5-minute hearing that often feels very quick and impersonal to them. And so based on some of that feedback, I wanted to ask you all, what information do we have about the accessibility of this process from our residents, and how did we get that information? What kind of assistance do we offer to residents in filing appeals? And if you could explain in detail what that assistance looks like and what it consists of. And do we have any information on who appeals and who doesn't, in terms of race, in terms of income, and in terms of neighborhood?
So there are two parts to the appeal process, and we'll have people address both of them. There's the first level review process, and then there's the BRT appeal process.
Okay.
So it looks like AJ is going to talk about the first level review, and then Carla Pagan will talk about the BRT process.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sure. So first level review is the informal appeal process, but what I always tell folks if I go to these workshops, community meetings, or anybody that reaches out to me from council offices, basically, if you think if your assessment is incorrect, tell us everything about your property, whether you think we know it or not. And if you have a reason why you think it's incorrect, let us know, if there's any information. We're not trying to put the burden on the homeowner, but we do get applications, not as much as when we first did AVI in 2014, that just says, you shouldn't raise my value this much in 1 year. We understand that, but if the value is accurate, that's something we have to evaluate, attempt to evaluate accurately. We'll don't want to pay any more taxes. That doesn't help us know whether we have the characteristics about your property correct or whether you think the value is right or not. You just, as a taxpayer, you feel like you shouldn't be burdened with more taxes. We don't get a ton of those anymore, but we did for a while. So what I always tell folks is anything you can tell us about the property, especially for this year, while rates were low, a lot of people were doing refis, pulling money out. If you have an outside appraisal done on the property and you think that could be helpful, send that to us. We can check condition, we can check square footage, we can see what comps that appraiser is using. Mindful also tell folks, if you're going to send us an appraisal that says your property is worth more than what we have on it, you might want to think twice about filing that and sending us that information, because we do have to consider that. We don't want to trap people, but it is a process that could go either way. And then, there's a property.phil.gov website that has a lot of the information that we have in our records, but folks can always reach out and request specific information about their property if they're not sure what we have on record. And, we're not asking people to say, well, which comparable sales do you think are most relevant to your property? But even just explaining what's going on, we can sometimes extract information that leads us to make a revision that they might not have thought made a difference, but so we're just kind of tell us everything that you could possibly want us to know about the property, and we'll try to pick out anything relevant that we may not have correct in our records on that.
Are people giving guidance in terms of what would be most helpful or most useful in making their case? And are people provided with information from you in a timely fashion on what you're going to use to prove otherwise? When they get that decision, they just see that we've made a decision, one way or the other. I would say one good thing that in this last cycle that we've done, I mentioned the workshops, so really those were extremely effective in that it got a chance to sit one-on-one with somebody, and I attended a number of them, and I talked people through the process and explained to them, well, tell me about it. Well, they say, well, I haven't updated anything for 30 years. Okay, well, do we say you were recently rehabbed, or is it average, below average? Okay, so maybe it's not a condition issue, we were able to find information that folks told us about a block that other neighbors didn't, which is why it's important for us to try to look at everything at one time when we have everything. Because there was, for instance, it was out in Councilmember Bass's district, but somebody pointed out an affliction that a number of the properties on her block were having. I had 3 people from that block that I had spoken to, and not one of them mentioned it, but they were also affected by it. So that's why when I say we try to do them in groups and do everything at the same time, we want to make sure we're not going 2-3 times out to a block, but also all the knowledge that the neighbors are saying. Somebody might point out something about that block specifically that applies to more than just their property, and we want to make sure we take that into consideration, because if we just change them but not everybody else, then they might be entitled to the same kind of consideration. So I do think obviously not everybody comes out to the one-on-ones, but those have been, in my time, the most effective tool to help. And we put stuff online, and people have gotten more in depth in what they submit, but there still is a little bit of a gap, and we certainly want to help close that moving forward. I know about the workshop we've hosted. We've proactively worked with your office to host a lot of them, and we appreciate, your staff's assistance there, and it has been useful. But outside of that, can people come to, revenue and get help outside of a workshop?
They should come to OPA. If they're talking about the assessment, they come to us because we're
okay.
different. We're not in MSB, so we're in a different location.
Sorry,
That's
can
okay.
they do that?
Yes, absolutely. We have a customer service center. People come down daily and ask for, if they don't have access to the web or they're not comfortable using it, or we can give them information. They're entitled to that information from the system. They can come to our customer service center and get that, or call. There's 2 numbers, but there's a couple numbers folks can call and just get general information.
Okay. How often do people do that?
I mean, we get a fair number of foot traffic throughout the year. I don't know how much of that is like applications versus just give me some information. The website gets a lot of hits, so a lot of people do go there first, and there's open data that has all that. But obviously, we know that not every taxpayer is going to be adept at that. So I don't have a number to say somebody just came down because they wanted information on their property, but we have aggregate numbers of walk-in, traffic for the office.
Thank you. And I know there were other parts of the process you wanted to talk about, and I also am interested in who files appeals and who doesn't. And also, if you could add on who's successful at appeals and who is not.
So we don't. So as far as demographic information, we don't store that on any homeowners. So we don't classify any kind of type. We can obviously see where the property is located, but we don't know any specific group or any kind of metric or demographic you want to break it out in as far as who does or doesn't file appeals. We could say areas of the city property values, as assessed or certified who file, but anything further than that is not information that OPA stores or collects.
Good morning, Council. Good afternoon, Council. Carla Pagan, Executive Director of the Board of Revision of Taxes. A lot of our answers are overlapped. We are forward-facing department. Our office hours are open. We're open Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 4:30. We too get walk-in traffic. A lot of people come to our office to appeal their assessment, or they come because they have a shocking tax bill. So they leave revenue and come to our office. The two main differences from the BRT appeal versus the first level review appeal, Pennsylvania state law says that any property owner can appeal their real estate assessment every year, any year, first Monday of October of the calendar year prior to the tax year in question. So our appeal filing deadline was this last October 4th. Let's see, what else did you ask? So people can file appeals with our department either in person, they can complete a fillable PDF form from our website and email it to us, or they can mail it into our department. I heard you ask about
I'm just wondering, what guidance do we give people in terms of what can help them to make an appeal? What assistance do we give to people to walk them through that process? And I guess we're not collecting information on who is filing and who's not, but that was my other question.
So our website also gives instructions of what people should include with their appeal. We tell anyone that will help support their opinion of value. So maybe someone has a recent mortgage appraisal done, or perhaps someone has 4 pictures of their dated kitchens and bathrooms, or maybe a leaky roof. We've had people submit evidence of plumbing work they just got done or severe electrical work they needed to have done. So anything that helps support their value argument. That information is indicated on our website to supply and also on the appeal form and instructions. But again, a lot of people call, email, or ask us in person on what good evidence could help their value argument. We don't break down appeal filing data by race or age or income brackets, but on average, on an annual basis, we maybe hear 75% of residential cases and about 25% of commercial appeals.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Mr. Bowe, I had one quick question before I ask Councilman Jones next up. this came to my attention based on the transfer ordinance. NACs, NACs, I talked to you about the issue briefly. As I said earlier, they get like 4 or 5 months back. The issue around benefits for the NACs, should I address that issue in the FY24 budget, or should I try and put some money in the transfer ordinance that's up tomorrow?
I would rather the 24 budget, just because I think we're set tomorrow, which I hope we are. So I would rather the 24 budget if I really have the choice.
Yeah, it's a softball question,
Yes.
but I'm saying,
I appreciate that you're asking, but yeah, I would much rather see it in the 24 budget.
FY24, I got a little more leverage in the transfer ordinance tomorrow.
You have leverage either way.
Nah, I don't ever abuse my position. But I'm just concerned. And so it is some understanding of the scope of the problem and the need to get these people some benefits.
Right.
And we're fighting for everybody else's benefits and healthcare and all the other people that work at the art museum and everything. And these people are basically satellite offices of the city of Philadelphia. And we're paying them peanuts with no benefits.
Understood.
So there's our understanding and some movement that we will address it.
Yes. And what we should probably do is have a kind of separate meeting just on that. So, because I know in general the issue, but I probably need to understand it a little better. But we'll work on it in the 24
No,
budget.
I mean, it's just, they have no benefits and no health care and no pension. And the average executive director at the NAC is like 14 years they've been employed. And I'm like, some point, that's just not right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Conservancies of properties in Philadelphia, it's my understanding that an entity can look at a vacant property in our city and then usurp and take control of it, start to establish that they're paying the taxes, they're making improvements, L&I kind of things, and then wind up with, unless they're not paid back, if they're not paid back, they can take control and sell that asset. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not, but I'm going to ask Francis Beckley from Law to come up and talk about it.
And so as we start to, could you put the framework of who is eligible to do it, who is eligible to be?
Almost any responsible person can petition the court, but you cannot get a conservatorship without a court order. So this is a legal proceeding. But nonprofit groups do it sometimes. Neighbors do it sometimes. They have to show that the property is being neglected and is basically creating a nuisance. And then the record owner could oppose the court action and try and show that he's responsible. In most cases, those people are dead or long gone. So it usually is a very positive thing.
So I have, and the reason I raise it is because we've had people come to my office to say where that was not the case. And that in older neighborhoods such as Winfield and other places where there might be tangled title, where there may be complications like that, that individuals that weren't nonprofits, they were, quite frankly, legal speculators that looked at the value of the property, not the benefit of the neighborhood, and said, this is a prime property to come at. So I guess what I'm asking you is, to what degree does this happen? How often does it happen, and where does it happen? And so if you could frame, like if 70% of the time it's nonprofits in a neighborhood that's trying to do right, that's one thing. If 50% of the time it might be a LLC out of New York that sees the value in a neighborhood that is aging, how do we know to what scale this is happening?
I should be quick to note this is a court-supervised, not a city-sponsored or supervised process, and we have very little involvement. Typically, we deal with the nonprofits because occasionally, if we feel strongly that if we are told, particularly by Commerce or by a council person, that this project, this particular conservatorship is beneficial to the neighborhood, then sometimes we will cut them a break on the property taxes that are delinquent on the property. But in general, this is something that the city has almost nothing to do with. We barely get notice we will get notice if they're delinquent taxes, but we don't typically enter an appearance in those court proceedings. We don't typically take a position. As I said, it's really courts rather than city supervised.
So this kind of flies under the radar in historic neighborhoods where, there's an opportunity to see value. Older neighborhoods where there might be 2 or 3 generations down the line of tangled title. And I guess when the courts come up, is that the orphans court or what court would that come under?
I believe these actions are usually filed in common pleas.
Common pleas. All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. The chair recognizes Councilman Harity.
Thank you, Council President. I just have a couple questions for the Board of Vision Taxes also. What is the primary reason for the backlog in rendering decisions on tax appeals? What is the average time after an appeal is filed that the BRT renders a decision? And is there a method to fast track these appeals through alternative programs?
So good afternoon, Carla Pagan, Board of Revision of Taxes. For fiscal year 2023, we actually don't have a backlog. Our appeal filing deadline was in October and hearings began in November. It does take more time to address each appeal and render decisions because, much like these hearings today, for all of our oral appeals filed, property owners in the city have a chance to come before the board, put on their appeal argument. They also get a chance to hear OPA rebuttal, what the OPA believes their assessment should be, and then the board will ask follow-up questions and a decision is rendered. So those hearings take time. Short appeal hearings for one case may last 5 minutes. Some cases where appellants are going back and forth over $25 million may last 45 minutes. So they do take some time to get through. So for people that filed October of 2022, they could receive their appeal decision in 3 months or 12, depending on when they're scheduled. Since 2023 has been such a large appeal assessment year, we do prioritize scheduling owner-occupied properties first, and then which pretty much have been scheduled through June of this year. And then we'll proceed with commercial appeal hearings and appeals filed by those residential investors that own multiple properties.
Okay. For the property assessment, how can the number of first-level review applications be reduced with more accurate tax appraisals? Or can the number of first-level review applications be reduced with more accurate tax appraisals? And how can the data collected be handled from a system-wide perspective? Instead of having discrete teams doing the data collection, can this be streamlined through other city departments?
So there's generally a correlation to some extent between accuracy of assessments and number of first-level reviews filed. But we certainly do find that, accuracy aside, the years in which values change the most, we generally see more appeals, or first-level reviews, I should say. So I think for some folks, it's not it's not, I know for a fact that for some folks it's not accurate to think it's just, hey, my assessment went up a lot. I want to see if I can, it doesn't seem right, but I want to see if I can get a break there. In other years where the assessments didn't change so much, we see a very low number. So that's not to say that those are more accurate, but when people see a smaller change, they don't always react the same way, regardless of what the accuracy is. So I would say smaller changes would probably result in less appeals, but we have to react to what the market does, and the market's been quite hectic, for lack of a better term, for the last couple of years, unlike anything we saw prior to that. So a more stabilized market and reassessments will likely reduce the number of first level review applications. I think I can say that fairly confidently.
Now, is there
And we also had, even though the increases were one of the larger ones since ABI, we saw less FLRs filed, even with the extended filing time, than we had in years with smaller changes in values citywide. So I would hope that speaks to the accuracy of the assessments. But
now, with the assessments, how are they done? Are they done by computer, or is it a program that generates these assessments, or is there a physical person going out like they used to, measuring the property and looking?
yeah, so as I was, I believe, talking about earlier with Councilmember Johnson, we collect data on every property. That data is collected through a number of ways. It's done through in-person inspections, where we're able to, like you were mentioning, our folks do walk blocks all the time. Nearly 6,000 parcels, 600,000 parcels in the city. We don't look at every property in person every year. It would be physically impossible, and we wouldn't get a staff large enough to do that. But industry standards do dictate that we should do it every number of years, either through in-person walking the blocks, or the technology has really improved over a number of years, that now high-level imagery like the city has with the pictometry and cyclomedia systems that OIT has purchased, that's considered industry acceptable to use that as like a check of a condition of a property or the use of a property. That data is collected on each property, and then we have a sales file of all transactions over whatever period of time we're looking at, where that same data is collected. And then for most properties, so we'll talk about single-family homes, those are mass appraisal modeled through a statistical modeling system that takes the data, takes the sales analysis, and comes up with the coefficients that I mentioned earlier in response to Councilmember Johnson's question. It applies those coefficients to the data file that we have on each property and projects an estimate of value for that property based on sales over a certain period of time that we're reviewing for a revaluation. But each of those values have the potential to be reviewed by an individual. We don't just take computer numbers and put them out there. Those are reviewed for accuracy by the individual evaluators who do those on-site inspections that I was mentioning earlier.
Well, what about in cases where maybe one person on a block gets an outrageous bill, and you can obviously look in the computer and find that the rest of the block is being charged one amount, but another property on that block, for no reason whatsoever, it's not new construction, it's just an average house on the block, is some of the complaints we're getting is about why are 10 of my neighbors paying this rate, and for some reason now I got hit with this big assessment, which really doesn't seem to have any reason to it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to answer that on a larger scale. It would be more of like, if there was a case, I could say, okay, well, it looks like this was different, correct or not, and that would explain the value, perhaps correct or not. If in our system all the data is the same for a set number of properties, then those values should, in theory, be all the same. But sometimes there's some variances that account for why it was put at a different value. But the system, as long as the data remains the same, projects those at the same value. But there are some data elements that are different, and sometimes the neighbors don't realize that we have them. And it could be wrong. We fix it, and then that value straightens out. But I think people, I've talked to think they're exactly the same as their neighbors, and they did a bump out kitchen, so it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit different in value, but not that much. But in other cases, they'll try to compare themselves to their neighbors when they really aren't exactly the same. So if, you know, it's really a specific case to say, yeah, this data is different. If it's not right, we'll correct it, and, you know, through one of these other processes, we can give them a revised value.
Yeah, I mean, most blocks, the houses are exactly the same. So, you know, I would think that it would be easy to assess houses that are the same.
There are certainly plenty of blocks in the city where everything is fairly the same, and there's others, you know, there's others that are more heterogeneous. But again, it's if there's a difference in our data, that is the likely explanation for the differences in value, you know, in most cases. So without knowing specifics, I mean, we see cases all the time. You know, somebody let's say renovated their house and took out permits. Their neighbor did not. Well, we can pick up the permits and do that, but that neighbor's house, we may not get that information until they go to sell the property. And they didn't do it the right way, but they do get a benefit because we're not allowed to just go into folks' homes. We have to be invited or allowed in. And if somebody does it on permanent rehab, oftentimes they don't want us coming in there because they don't want us to know what they did, or L&I or whatever. So that the neighbors know what's in everybody's houses, so they could say I'm the same, but we don't have the same evidence to say that they're the same in some cases.
And if they were really all the same, that's a legitimate basis for appeal. If they're exactly the same and the value's different.
Yeah, that's something they could file the appeal, and especially if their value is not accurate, the one that's standing out from the rest.
Yeah, but it would seem to me that if we had an accountability and checks and balances, to look at blocks and make sure that we know where the row homes are and where they're going to be basically the same. So if there's a discrepancy, there's got to be a way that it pops up, so that way we could say, well, wow, wait a minute here, 20 houses on this block are assessed at this price, but this one house across the street that's exactly the same is assessed at another spot. It would just seem to me to save taxpayers a trip, you know, if we were actually doing our own checks and balances.
So there is that review process that I was speaking of after the values are projected, that the evaluator can look at a block or a group of properties and see the values, and if something jumps out. And typically, if they catch that and the data seems to be the same, they can make that adjustment. Typically, there's something in our records that says that property is different, and maybe it's not the case, and then we can update the data. But when they're reviewing they have the ability to do a QA on like a block-by-block basis as they review the values before they're finalized. But it doesn't catch everything.
Yeah, I would just think that it would be fiscally responsible if we were taking a look at this stuff too, because, you know, people have to take off to come down and file an appeal. That costs them money. The whole idea of them fighting the assessment is because they don't have the money to pay the assessment. And, you know, it's a question of convenience, and the mistake is ours. So we need to own the mistake and try to rectify the situation.
All right. Good, Councilman. Thank you. Councilman, did you have a point of information on a specific?
Yeah, on this right here, point of information, I just wanted to also get to the heart of if at some point we can tell us more around how do we do more work around putting a hands-on approach to when we see that a block's numbers are one neighbor's numbers is one way and another neighbor's numbers is another way. What I think Councilman Harity is saying is that how can we get away from the computer system or an algorithm and focus on putting the hands-on touch to this? And so I would, just hope that we can get more information at a later date around how we can create a better system on putting a hands-on approach to this algorithm, because as Councilmember Harity said, people may not even be aware that they can appeal, and number two, may not want to make that time, and it's just not fair that we don't do as much as possible to make sure that we make it easier for people not to have to go through those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Council.
Thanks, Council President Clark.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Lozada.
Yeah, I want to get some clarity. I had conversations with some folks when I went upstairs after our morning session. Is homestead, I know that the preference is for homestead to be applied to the property that is your primary home. But are there instances where a person has multiple homes and they applied for homestead on the property that is not their primary home? And is that okay?
So you can only get one homestead, and it is supposed to be for your primary residence, but you can, yeah.
But if it's not their primary residence and they have it on one property,
They should
is it
have
a big
it.
deal?
They
Is
should
a
have it
big-
on their primary residence.
Do we track that?
Well, they fill out a form and they attest to that. We do some auditing of it, yes.
Okay, so I don't understand how we track whether homestead is in the person's primary residence or not, but we can't track whether people have homestead or not.
We can track
if
whether
they're
people have
delinquent.
homesteads. No, we know where people have homesteads and where they don't. What the commissioner was saying this morning is the thing that we can't crosswalk is homesteads to delinquencies. That was the issue that he was saying we couldn't do. But we do know where people have homesteads and where they don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Thomas.
I promise this is my last set of questions. I want to go to revenue. I talked to the Commerce Department, and one of the things that I pushed the Commerce Department on was creating a new website for the city of Philadelphia to make the city a lot more user-friendly. They assured me they would have put out an RFP for a new website. I'm not sure where we are with that. Let me tell you what my problem is. When we're dealing with constituents who owe the city of Philadelphia money, there's no way that we have the ability to streamline all of the money somebody owes the city of Philadelphia by easily either navigating a website or talking to one department. I have to talk to revenue about issues with revenue, then I have to talk to L&I about issues with L&I, then I have to talk to water about issues with water. A person could look up in the city of Philadelphia and owe thousands of dollars, and number one, not know they owe thousands of dollars, and number two, it could possibly take months for somebody to do the deep dive that they need to do in order to find out all the revenue that you owe the city of Philadelphia. So my first question is, where are we with the new website as it relates to making phila.gov a little more easy to navigate? And number two, what solutions can we begin to brainstorm, or what can you propose as it relates to streamlining the revenue that businesses and constituents owe the city of Philadelphia, so all people have to do is make one phone call or send one email, and we can just say, here is all the debt that you owe for every single department. It makes no sense that people have to chase us to give us money.
Well, I mean, I think the Revenue Department has made great strides with our new tax system in making it easier for taxpayers to see their tax debt.
So it's not just taxes though, right?
I know,
Because
I
it's
understand.
fines, fees, taxes, the whole nine. So I could owe revenue taxes, right? But then what if I owe gas, or what if I owe refuse fee, or what if I owe L&I, or what if we give out these tickets for grass and trash. There's so many different fees and fines with the city of Philadelphia that it could take a person months to identify all of the money you owe the city and to pay the city that money. I know other cities, I consulted with some council members in Atlanta, right? And the way Atlanta is set up, and they're very business friendly towards black and brown businesses, we necessarily aren't, but the way that they're set up is that a person can communicate with one agency, one department. All you have to do is get on the phone with one person, and they can identify all the money that they owe the city of Atlanta and be able to pay it. What are we doing here in Philadelphia? Because at the end of the day, one of the things that we discuss is the fact that we can't collect revenue. I'm not going to ask some of the complicated revenue questions that my staff presented, but they have shown that a large part of the revenue that is owed to the city of Philadelphia is not being collected. And I would like to argue that part of the problem is that it's not easy to pay the city of Philadelphia, right? If I owe you money, why I got to chase you to give you my money?
Right. So I think we have made great strides in moving in that direction, but we're nowhere near the situation you described in Atlanta. We have brought into our new tax system, L&I fees are in there, the refuse fees are in there, so more fees in addition to taxes are in our system. We also do have a tax clearance system where, taxpayers can go through our clearance system, and that's a little bit broader because that will cover taxes, and we can cover water debt too as well. But you are correct in that there are siloed systems within the city, and that it's not, all of the debt is not contained in any one place. So we've moved to making it better, but we're a long way from the model that you described.
Well, let's cut a deal, right? How much time I have left? I'll give up all that time that I have left if you could assure me that you could help me and put something in writing so that we can figure out moving forward what can we do to make Philadelphia a little more user-friendly? Because at the end of the day, I would like to give a compliment to Celine and Donna, two people that my office have worked with on a consistent basis who have helped us navigate all these different departments, because without them, we wouldn't be able to properly provide the constituent services that we have to based on the jobs that we have. But I'll stop right there and let's figure out what we can do offline to come up with systems and what do I need to fight for on the city council side to make Philadelphia a little more user-friendly. Because I know when I owe people money, I don't want to have to beg you to take my money.
Sure.
Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Lozada?
Just for a point of reference, I want to follow up on what Councilman Isaiah just said, and that should go, data sharing should go across the board, right? Every department should figure out how we talk to our colleagues, right? If we're serving people, how do we talk to our colleagues and share information? Coming downtown or connecting with us should be a one-stop shop. We shouldn't have to send them to other community-based organizations so that they can then call 15 people in the city of Philadelphia to figure out how they come into compliance, right? And this is not just revenue. This is license and inspection, permit process. This is anti-violence. There's a bunch of young people who are getting services from different community-based organizations, but they don't share data either. So we don't know if we're serving the same 15 young people or we're serving 500 people. We don't know, why is it so difficult for us as a first-class city to be able to share information with one another where people can be in compliance across the board? We should be able to figure that out.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. We will finish up with Councilwoman Gaudier, but I got to tell you, as a person who was sat through a gazillion of these budget hearings, these same questions year after year after year after year after year. Why can't we do things more efficiently and streamline and make it much more user-friendly government? And as we have this debate about who's going to be the next, I guess, called CEO that works with the board members of this particular body, that should be front and center. I mean, got to make government more user-friendly at the end of the day. This makes a much more competitive environment. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gaudier.
Thank you. I feel like that was a mic drop moment, so I'm sorry to continue the conversation after that, but that was, I fully agree with that, Council President. I have two just clarifying questions about what some things talked about earlier. The first is for revenue. Did I understand you to say, I think in response to Councilmember Brooks's questions, that we know the difference between who is enrolled in property tax relief programs and who isn't, but we do not know the difference among who is enrolled versus who is eligible. Did I understand that correctly, or?
Yes, I mean, we can identify who is enrolled in what program. What we can't determine is, and I think it might have been in the context of cross-enrollment, we definitely cannot identify, it was either in cross-enrollment or in the auto refunds, in identifying who is eligible for the programs, because we don't have income information on every resident in the city, and we do a lot of information sharing, but we don't have that information available to us. A lot of our income information sharing, we get information from the IRS, we get information from the state, but that is very delayed because it comes from income tax filing. So, for example, this April 15th, the tax returns will get filed with the IRS and with the state. But it'll take us a year to 2 years until that information will get shared with us, and then it gets loaded in our system. And that's not on our side. That's on the IRS's side or the state side. They have to process all those tax returns, get it into their system, then transmit that data to us. So we do get it, but we get it far down the road. So it's come up in the context of sending out the low income refunds automatically. Okay. That's really difficult for us to do, especially on a timely basis.
And it makes it hard for us to sort of figure out how many people are eligible because people's income changes so much from year to year, or because, is there a way we can even have a system that's not perfect around understanding how many residents are eligible for certain things and how many are enrolled, and then work from there to understand the work that we have to do?
I think we can. I think that it's a good conversation that there's limitations in what we can do, but we can use it to help identify areas where there or taxpayers who may be eligible. But again, in the context of auto enrollment, we wouldn't be able to auto enroll them because we wouldn't know their current year status. We might know what their income and residency was 2 years ago, but we could use that information, and we do use some of that information for outreach I try to identify areas where, and taxpayers who may be eligible for programs. So that's what we do. We try to use that to guide our outreach, but we're unable to use it for auto enrollment.
Okay, thank you. And then I know I asked about OPA vacancies earlier, but I wanted to just have a little more detail on the amount of vacancies and with relation to what positions.
Yeah, so let me pull up the end of the calendar 22 numbers, or second quarter of the fiscal year. Chart is. So overall, through second quarter of the fiscal year 23, OPA had 50 vacancies.
Okay, and then what positions?
So that's a mix of evaluation, clerical, administrative. Okay, so as of that point, we had 10 vacancies for Real Property Evaluator 1. We have filled 7 of those since that report.
Okay.
And some of those are ongoing because our entry-level positions are career progression, so folks only serve 1 year in those positions, and then they automatically matriculate to a higher level, which allows us to backfill coming in. But we're likely to always see vacancy at some point during any fiscal year in that position. The Evaluator 2 position, which is the next level up, that's the automatic career progression I just mentioned. There are 19 vacancies, but those will be filled as the people go up. We have 3 vacancies at supervisor, 2 vacancies at administrator level and 8 vacancies in the clerical aid level.
Okay. Do you overall just have a general opinion of how that's impacted your operations, particularly following the increased assessments and first level review process?
So the more staff we have in those evaluator categories, the more we can divide up the city's inventory so folks can handle less accounts, which means if they have to do on-site inspections or FLRs or appeals, it's hopefully a little more evenly distributed, which means they can get through them, a little faster. That doesn't always, there's not always necessarily a correlation because somebody could have a large number of accounts, but if there's not a lot of activity in that area or their values didn't change much, they might not have a lot of FLRs to deal with. But where we do see those cases, we certainly try to help augment existing staff with other individuals that perhaps aren't as busy to where they can lend some of their expertise and assistance in areas to move through that. If we had, more people, would we get through the FLRs a little faster? Yes, I would definitely say that. And I think with this last round of hiring, we were actually pretty much able to fill all of our available vacancies, which, like I said, 3+ years that I've been here, we haven't gotten to that level. I'm optimistic we can continue that, but it'll be a lot of help when we can get those people in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Harity.
Yeah, I'd just like to know, what's the total number of employees in your department?
So the total budgeted number is 226. I should know that off the top of my head, right? But let's say, yeah, 226. And we were only filled at 176 as of this increment run for the budget. But as I said, we're going to have close to, that was just the evaluator positions I was speaking. We're doing some other hiring, so we're going to have almost half of those filled in the coming months.
But right now, you're about a quarter, 25%.
Yeah,
short.
and we've actually hired people since that run as well in different positions, so it's a little less than that. But, we have seen some attrition with folks retiring. People were in drop years ago, and, their time has just come up. But we have more applicants for our entry-level tests last time around. It's being given again soon. I would like to see, hopefully that kind of talent pool out there remains the same or keeps getting larger. But if the latest round is any indication, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to fill those up. But yeah.
Yeah, because 25% seems like a lot of
yeah,
people to be short in a department where not only are you counting on the money for the city revenue, but also people trying to pay their...
Yeah, and some of the vacancies, the higher levels, those are open competitive test only. So as folks retire, we have to go through HR and give the civil service exams, which Mike Zakagny talked about yesterday, and I think he specifically mentioned our supervisor position, which we worked with them to sort of give the alternate path around the degree. And I think he mentioned 14 individuals in our office that would not have qualified prior. So that's given more people in our department opportunities to fill some of those vacancies. And then if we can get the same kind of inflow of new talent, we can get that number reduced.
What's the time frame from application to hire?
Application to sit for the exam, you mean? Or
Right, yeah.
I mean,
But from the time they take the exam to the time they are actually hired, how much time in between lapses?
I can't give you an exact time, but I can tell you just based on recent history, from announcement through hiring and bringing people on board, we've been able to give the test twice a year, onboard new groups twice a year. So I don't want, I'll say roughly 6 months and maybe 4 or 3 from a certain period. So we'd like to give the test at least twice a year. Where it becomes an issue for us is if we give it too often, you have like 2 people that want to take it. It doesn't really make sense to give it that often. But we did see an uptick in the last exam. There's another one that's out there. It's open right now. We'll see how many come in on that.
How do we get the information out that we are hiring for those positions? How do we announce it?
Because if you're only getting 2
people to apply when we have 50 jobs.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the city sites. We have, we do job fairs. We've done some job fairs on site at OPA and with larger city groups. We do get, people that work in our office outside of the office will have a network of professionals. We do get folks through that.
Are you doing any web advertising, Facebook? Instagram, where people are actually looking now?
We
Because
don't,
they're not
OPA
looking
itself
at
does not. We would be part of any larger advertising from HR, but OPA itself does not. But then the other position, as I mentioned earlier, that we're bringing on is management trainees, so that's a citywide thing. That's not necessarily specific to OPA, but we're getting into that as well to help close that gap. So that would be like a citywide advertisement, not just OPA specific.
And what's the average salary?
For entry level or just in general?
Entry level.
I know approximate, but we'll get it to you in writing. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Okay.
It's where our salaries are, I will say this, when it comes to other people doing this job for municipalities, we are not only competitive, we are really the best in the region for starting and progression. So it's not a matter of people going to other counties and doing the job, it's just people that want to get out of the private sector and come do the job.
Well, that's good to hear, because it's probably one of the only departments we're actually ahead of the game. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Lozada.
How many members are in your executive staff?
My executive staff, I believe we count that as, so we have exempt and then executive. The executive, I believe, is 5, but let me get that exact page for you. Okay, so executive staff, 5.
And can you break it down by race for me?
4 African American, 1 white.
And of your full-time staff, how many are bilingual?
How many are bilingual? So currently we have listed on the documents as 0. We know that's not correct, but with the implementation of One Philly, it's moved to self-reporting on the individuals, and we haven't had anybody self-report in our system the languages that they speak. We have legacy data. We know those people still work there, but we did not want to guess at a number. But we are, I won't call up our administrative services director, but we're making a push to make sure people self-report, because we need to report that data, and we want to know, and we want to make sure we know who can speak what, if there's any assistance needed, like on site. But since moving to a self-reporting, we don't have anybody self-reporting as of yet for that.
And besides English, is there anyone else that speaks another language besides not just English or Spanish, but Mandarin?
Yes, I mean,
Chinese.
Yes, we from legacy data, I know there was a number of different languages that were spoken, and that's just not contained in this right now. But yes, we have between Chinese, Russian, Creole. So we had a number of different. So we have to remind folks that we need them to self-report, so that way we can document that and communicate that as needed to you guys and whoever else needs it.
As a city that is as diverse as the one that we live in, our workforce should be reflective of that across the board. And so my expectation is that we look at those numbers, we figure out how we increase diversity across the board in city departments, because this could be exactly why some of our residents are not in compliance the way that they could be.
Yes, and Councilmember Johnson did ask me a question on that earlier, and it was on documents, and I had wrote it down, and now I can't find that page. But we are over 50% non-white as far as employees in the office. So it's about 87, 78 for the overall numbers as of the end of the second fiscal quarter.
Good, Councilman. Thank you. Thank you. Appears to be no additional questions. Where'd you come from, Councilman? I tried to get that in quick.
That seems unfair.
Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work on this, and I know our office is in constant contact. with OPA and revenue. And we heard all the challenges that we have and still are having. What are we doing to streamline and I know we spoke about this before, but streamlining the process from OPA to revenue to address the appeals that are happening as they are being done, and then the time frame from appeal decision to revenues changing so for billing purposes.
For the record, I saw Councilman Squill about 9:20 this morning walking by our building, so we could have addressed this a few hours ago now. But, so in terms of the appeals specifically, we get a docket from the BRT several days to a week or so after the appeals have been decided with all the decisions. We put in the processing. There was a few delays at first. We kind of worked some of the kinks out, and at this point, from the time the BRT decisions get to us, to get those numbers over to revenue, we're at a month, maybe 35 days. So that's before we were closer to 6 weeks, and now we've modified the workflows a little bit and better identified, and so we're getting those over to revenue as it stands right now about a month from getting the decisions from the BRT on those cases. And if we're able to speed that up, we certainly will, but we have made some improvement from when first started back in the fall.
All right, that's good to hear. And then also the issues with the billing as far as the revenue sending out, especially for seniors when they're on payment plans, getting that and then their payments to revenue. How are we addressing the challenges of them getting they used to give you a year worth of coupons, right? Now we're getting monthly statements being sent out so that there would be a bill notice to go out, and there must be some type of delay or something going on where people are getting late notices.
Yes, council member. So as you know, we have a new integrated tax system that we implemented, and the installment plan, as you said, for people that are able to pay their real estate taxes over 12 months. Used to be a coupon book, which we sent out. And there's a lot of problems with that. People lose it, they forget. So best practice is to do monthly statements. So that's what we do now. We send them a monthly bill. But there's been some challenges, probably on both sides, users and with the revenue department in this new process. So we're working on that. It's the timing kind of changed. So people are sending in their notices and they're getting processed, and then there's kind of a timing lapse sometime if a person pushes up against the due date of the filing and there's any kind of a delay, that a notice could then go out to them telling them that they are delinquent. It's not really should not be a delinquency notice. So it's something that your office made us aware of. We're now looking at the notice so that notice is a softer notice, a notice that says if you have made this payment, please ignore this notice, not so much a delinquency notice as a reminder if you fail to make your payment, please submit it. So it's a little bit of a process. Change is hard, and a large part of this group that is in the installment program are seniors. They've been using the coupon book for a long period of time, so they're used to that. So the change has been something that we understand is challenging, and we want to make it as easy as possible. But we do believe the change from the coupon book to the monthly notice is better for everyone. But we all have to adapt to this.
I like the idea of notice, because you get a bill, you pay it, right? You get a bill, you pay it. You don't have to forget. The problem is, it seems like the bills were going out late, and then by the time they were paid, but we also had some issues with, seniors get very nervous if they think that they're going to lose their house, right? They lived in it their whole lives, and it's a challenge. But we had some people on direct debit, which was being directly deposited from their account. They were still receiving a notice that they were late. So that seems like something internal
Yeah, we're not, as you know, we just, this is something that I just became aware of, this from your office, so we're looking into it. We huddled this morning, my team, before the hearing to, kind of get up to speed, try to understand what's going on. We're still looking into it, but, we've already, made some, just in that brief amount of time, made some decisions that, we'll look at the notice, we'll change the notice. We don't want it to be a threatening notice. We want it to be more of a reminder, and we're going to look to see what's creating these notices going out for people that have paid. Obviously, we want people that may have missed a payment to get that notice, but we don't want people, it's not good for our department either. We don't want to get calls, and we definitely don't want to, have your, your constituents be worried about their home, especially if they're paying. So it's something we're looking into.
Yeah, I think we're willing to work over time to do that. It's just stressful for the constituents who, are worried about it. So, it's easy for us to say they're going to fix it, don't worry, that letter means nothing. To them, it's not an easy thing to say. So.
No, we understand, and this is a high priority for us.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Thank you. That concludes the question by members of the committee. The committee will stand in recess until Monday, April 3rd, 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene. We will be remote. We'll be remote on Microsoft's Teams. Thank you very much. Talk to you all next week. Thank you.